Hi, I'm Chris Parker, and here today to talk to you about funding Georgia schools. You know, this is professional development for staff. You're a teacher in a system. You need to understand how the schools are funded. And we found that very few teachers fully understand how schools are funded. And we want to try to make this as informational and as understanding as possible. Sometimes it can be very complicated. We're going to make it less complicated, hopefully today. Why should staff understand funding? So why should this matter to you? Well, one, it limits misinformation in an era where Facebook's so prevalent and things where people can run with an idea. You need to help inform people of what we can and can't do. So if you're frustrated that we're building a performing arts center and we haven't hired this teacher, that's two different types of money. And we're going to talk about why that's maybe not the same thing. So you can help limit misinformation by understanding funding in the school system. Salary and benefits are by far the largest part of the budget. You're going to find that out, that 80% of people's budgets are salary and benefits. So if the budget changes, if money goes down, the only way to really change that is to change staff. And so a lot of times we don't understand taking less paper at the copy machine is not going to be a way to fix the budget if it becomes a problem. If you guys in your system make $1 million less, you're going to lose about 10 teachers. There's really no other way to do it. So we're going to find ways to understand funding so that doesn't happen. We got to understand how to maximize funding so you can help yourself know when to ask and when not to. If you understand funding, you maybe understand when you can ask your principal, or if you're a principal, when you can ask the central office for certain things because you understand it'll fund better. And it may be something that's not going to affect funding. Understand when you can ask and when you can't. And then lastly, just educate yourself. You're going to be in a profession like teaching, a great profession. You care about kids. We want to find the best way possible to educate kids. And even though funding is not hands-on with the kids, and it is very, very important in the piece of education to make education go. It just really is a big part. And if you can educate yourself on how to make it the best it can be, hopefully that'll trickle down into student achievement. All right, so where does the money come from? We're going to talk about 4 categories today: state funds, local taxation, eSPLOST, and federal funds. Most everyone gets all 4 of these. Some don't have an eSPLOST. That's a referendum that gets voted on. We'll talk about, but all school systems have state funds, local funds, and federal funds. And we're going to talk about how those how those come into being and what they mean over the next few minutes. State funds come from QBE. Okay, in 1985, Georgia passed an act called the Quality-Based Education Act, which gives state funds to local school systems. Okay, and it's a series of formulas, very complicated. We're going to try to make it painless today, but it's a series of formulas that give your school system a certain amount of money that they can use to fund their school. State QBE funds come from these categories, and I don't feel like you got to know all these right now. I'm going to hit them quickly. We're going to go through each one, then hopefully by the end, these words will make more sense to you. Direct instructional cost is basically teachers. Most of your direct instructional cost is your teachers. That's how we pay and fund teachers. Indirect cost would be people like your administration, maybe maintenance, maybe the media center, people like that aren't necessarily involved directly in instruction, but they earn money and we can fund them through some state funds. Categorical grants deal with things like transportation. You know, what do we get for transportation? And then the local fair share is the minus. So think of like, we get a direct instructional amount, we get an indirect amount, we get categorical grants amount, and they take away your local fair share. We'll talk about what that is later, just saying the local government has to help fund. How do we determine how you get? So like if I'm in Pickens County and we've got around 4,000, a little more than 4,000 students, we get a certain amount of money. Well, Cherokee doesn't get the same amount. How do we know? Well, they use 2 formulas to determine how much you get per student. In the top 4 now, FTE, full-time equivalents, and training experience data, they take these data and determine how many of that monies you get. So you're going to get these things. We're going to figure out how many FTEs you got, what's the training experience modifier is. We're going to put all that together and come up with a number. And I know that may not make sense to you now. Hopefully it will in a few minutes. So most people that are teachers understand what FTE is. They've heard the FTE. Maybe they don't understand, but they've heard the term FTE, that twice a year we're going to count students, and students are going to be labeled as gifted, general, special ed, and identified in which classes they are at that time, whether the teacher is funded They can teach gifted, or they have this, or whatever it is. All that is put in together twice a year, and we determine how many students we have. But your FTE number is not exactly how many students you have. It could be based on weighted categories. There's 20 different categories. Well, what the state's figured out is the cheapest person to fund is a high school kid. So high school kids right here are funded at 1.0000, 1 FTE. So remember, if you saw on the last slide, last year, an FTE is going to be worth about $2,700. So each high schooler, this general ed, gets that much money. If they're a kindergartner, they get 1.6719 FTEs. And so if they're in the EIP, which is early intervention, they get more. First through third grade get a different weight. So all these are weighted compared to that high school kid, general ed high school kid, who's just going to get what the state determines. And that number changes every year. The legislature comes up with a number that the 1.0 equals, and you get that much money. And then if they're in special education, they actually get more money for less segments in specific learning disability. So that's one thing that you can find a lot in level 3, but all of these 5 levels or special education, people fit into those, they get a certain number of FT. So that may be confusing to you here. Maybe this will help. So I made up a school district. This is not anybody, just all round numbers. And each FTE in 2021 was $2,775.21. The state legislature sets that number. Then you take, okay, we've got this many students. So this school system has 250 kindergartners. They're going to make that much money for kindergartners. Kindergarten EIP, they have 30, they're going to make that much, all the way down. This school system of 5,000 students is going to make that much money, $20,756,000 to fund their system. You say, well, that's a lot of money. And not really, not really. In a system of 5,000 people, you're going to find that they probably have around 700 to 800 employees, and this 20 million probably would fund about, with benefits and everything, 200 teachers and some administrators. So this system probably has over 400 teachers. So you're going to find that this number can change, and we're going to need more than what the state can offer us. And we'll show why that is here in a minute. But understand that's how they come up with that number. That's the state's going to send us money based on that. It's direct. Most of that is direct instructional cost, counting every student through the FTE. And you're going to get most of the teachers are going to be in direct instructional cost. And you'll see some funding sheets in a minute. Indirect costs, remember, are the people who don't directly involve instruction, media center, principals, etc. Each of those is determined by the FTE. So for every FTE, you get a certain percentage of a person. The district can always fund more. So if you look at something like this is from the state of Georgia funding formula for every kindergartner. Remember, kindergartner is 1.6712. You're going to get $830 for an aide. You're going to get $99 for a counselor. If you get 450 kids in a building, you can pay for the whole counselor. That's what these ratios over here are. If you get 1,100, you can pay for a tech specialist. So if this elementary school doesn't have 1,100 students, the district's going to pay a lot of their salary through local funds, not state. The state will pay if it gets up to 1,100. That's when you can earn it. Same way with a social worker. Here you got one social worker for every 2,475 students. That made up school system I just talked about have 5,000 students. Now you're looking at them probably having 2 social workers. If they have 3 social workers, then one of them will be local fund, which we'll get to local funds in a minute. But talking about state funds, this is how you can earn those positions. Think about like secretary. Each FTE is going to earn you $38.23 at kindergarten level for a secretary. Well, that's not going to fund more than maybe 1 secretary for the whole school. Most places have more than 1. So most of this is going to be still need local funds, but you see how we're earning some of these people. Okay, and of course the weight slightly can change as you go up in grades. You look to upper elementary, middle grades, basic, high school, same thing. These ratios don't change. We're still 1,100 to 1 for a tech specialist, still at 2,475 to 1 for a social worker. That stuff's not changing. What's changing is down here with some of the weights. Okay, now each one of these is weighted different, so it may be a little more money, but the ratio doesn't change. So like for a counselor, high school counselor, we're going to be one for 450 students. So if we got 900 kids at a high school, you have 2 counselors. If you have 1,800, maybe you can have 4. And what if you have 4, but you only have 1,100 kids? Well, then the local money has to pick up for the rest. But from the state funding, you're going to get about 450 to 1. Special ed, same categories, same ratios. The only difference is these numbers up here at the top where you see the weight is changing. So you're getting more money for, certain positions. And then in some cases, the percentages will change too down here for the indirect instruction. Recognize the terms: direct instruction, there's your teachers; indirect instruction, there's some of the personnel; and then staff development. So even something like staff development, we're going to earn money off of each student. So each student that comes in, we're going to get a certain number. In this case, special ed level 1, $45.04 per student can go to staff development. So then we get a certain amount of money and we can use for staff development. Gifted, remedial, alternative, et cetera. Gifted funds higher. All these fund higher. ESOL or ELL students fund higher, but the ratios don't change. The categories aren't changing. Just the numbers in the middle are changing. They're what they weigh, what it can bring to the district. This is your administration. So if you look at, I'll point out a few things to show you. Say at a middle school, you got a middle school and you're going to earn 1 assistant principal for every 624 students, basically. So for 624 students, you're going to earn 1 assistant principal, and that's on 10 months. So if your assistant principal is paid more than 10 months, local money. If you have 2 assistant principals at a school about 650 students, local money. Just so you understand how that is working and what the state funds and what they don't. We will get direct instructional costs for things other than staff, and you'll see some of that here. Consumable materials, instructional materials, travel, equipment reimbursement, non-vocational lab equipment, media center books. These are can be textbooks, can be all kind of different things that per person we get X amount of dollars. So for instructional materials, if you got a middle school student, we're going to get $39.87 for each 1 FTE. So if that person is a high schooler, that's 1.0. If they're a middle schooler, maybe it's 1.13 something. You times that amount, there you go. Categorical grants, that's direct instructional costs and indirect costs. Categorical grants are the third one. These can be grants you get for improving your facilities. Can be grants you get for transportation. Although transportation costs have gone extremely higher toward local, we don't near fund transportation with state money, but we do get some state money for transportation. We get some state money for upgrading a facility if it's been a long time since it's been upgraded. Lastly, they have something called equalization grants that fit into category grants, and those can be grants that money for districts who struggle to raise local funds. They can get some money from some of the more affluent districts. All right, so the second part of figuring out what kind of number of money we're going to get is understanding the T modifier. Because what happens was when they come up with this QBE thing, 1985 QBE Act, they say, well, we'll send you this and we'll send you this teacher. Well, how do you figure out that the counselor is $450, 450 to 1? I mean, you know how much? Well, they're equating that based on the lowest paid person. So what districts inadvertently could do is only hire the people that are on T4 bachelors with no experience because they're going to be the cheapest. That's not what they wanted. So they come up with this T&E, what's called training and experience, T&E modifier, which were basically the district is going to get money for the difference in training and experience. And I'll show you what that means. So this is the state salary scale. And what I've highlighted here is what a first-year teacher with a bachelor's is going to make on the state salary scale. You say, no, we make more than that. Well, that's local money. The state's going to give you this much. If you make more than that, that's what's called a local supplement. So we're going to get to local money in a minute. The state's going to give you $37,092 to fund that counselor at 450 people. Every 450 kids, you can earn this $37,000. Well, what if we hire a counselor that's got a specialist and she's on step 11? Well, you're down here at about $60,000. So the difference in that money, $60,000 minus $37,000, so 23,000 in that case, would be what's called T&E money. The district would get that money. It comes a year late, so it's always a year behind, but we do get that money where we're not encouraged to hire people who may have less experience or less degrees. We're actually encouraged to hire people with more experience and more degrees because we're going to earn that T&E money for them. It doesn't cost the district more. The last thing to understand about state funds is local fair share, because one of the other problems with the QBE Act was, before that, before 1985, mostly districts were funded locally, and they weren't funded that well, to be honest. Districts were totally funded locally, total local taxes, and they weren't able to do a lot of things they do now. So the QBE Act has been great for Georgia. But one of the things the legislatures were worried about was that everybody would just depend on the state to do everything, and the local governments would do nothing. So whenever they figure out all those formulas, that 450-to-1 council ratio and all that stuff, and they figure out what you have, they're always going to take out what equates to 5 meals for each position. And 5 meals, we'll get to the millage rate in a minute, but 5 meals would be $5 out of every $1,000 in property taxes or in digest in general that you could get. So whatever your district can get, you're going to have to at least tax people 5 meals to cover the rest. And so we'll kind of see what that is in just a minute. So direct instructional cost, teachers. Indirect instructional cost, the people that are beyond the teaching categories that we can earn for. Categorical grants, facilities, transportation, nurses, local fair share is what you take away. And that's the formulas. But then to figure out exactly how many of those formulas we're going to use, we're going to do FTE calculations, count the number of students and put them in these categories. And then we're going to do training and experience. We're going to turn in what we call CPI, our certified personnel information, send it to the state with all of our people's information and what they're teaching. And based on their years experience and degrees, we're going to earn more money. All right, this is a real funding sheet from Pickens County. So this is what we actually used in FY21. So if you look over here, this is our local fair share. So basically we earned this much in salary from the state, this much in operating things from the state. We had $30 million in QBE earnings, but 5 meals for us is $6,400,000. So you take that away to get our state funds, okay? And you'll see that's our local fair share. There's the QBE programs. There's the administration. So if you look over here, you see school administration, facility M&O. Now, this is what we earn. We spend much more than all of these up here on teachers. For example, with kindergarten, we had 230 kindergartners. That generated money of $1,484,000. We take away the 5 meals, we got $1.1 million for kindergarten. Okay, so you figure out how many kindergarten teachers you have, plus in our district, we probably have about 16 kindergarten teachers plus parapros. It's the salary is going to be more than that, but it's going to be close. And so you see over here, we earned 15.33 teachers this year. We earned 34 teachers, 1st grade to 3rd grade. And so if we have 34, then we're probably funding at a very good level. If we have more than that, it's coming out of local funds, which we're going to get. Here's the categorical grants. All right, so that's the state. Now we're going to talk about local funds. In addition to state funds, schools generate local funds through ad valorem taxes, mostly property tax, but there's some other taxes. Each district has to tax. It's a state law. We have to have local taxes of at least 5 meals. That's $5 out of every $1,000 in value. And that's called the local fair share. How do we get local funds? Where are the taxes? Most people know about property taxes. Property tax is going to be the biggest number. We also get motor vehicle taxes. Mobile homes have to pay a tax. Timber and heavy duty equipment. Now, each of these is assessed at 40%. I think people own houses understand this, but if you don't, if your house is worth, $1 million, then they're going to tax it on $400,000. 40% of your market value is what you get taxed on. So it's not even your entire value. The only exception will be timber. Timber is taxed at 100%. So we'll get a total gross digest of what the properties in our area is worth, the total number. Some things will be exempted. You take that away, and then 1 mil of that number generates 1/1000th of that amount in property taxes. This is in Pickens County as well, where I work, and you get an idea for what's happening here. You can see the amount of money coming in through property taxes. That'd be real and personal, motor vehicle, mobile homes, timber, heavy duty equipment, and that's the gross digest. I mean, that's what it's all worth. Then you take away the exceptions. We have certain senior exceptions, and you get a net number. Then whatever we set the millage rate as for us in FY20, it was 14.83. That is worth, each one of those is worth 1/1000th of that. And so you get the 22,322,637. So for us, this is around half of the budget, and the state is the other half. I mean, it's not exactly that, but that's what a lot of districts aim to do. The next thing you can do is use eSPLOST. Now, eSPLOST is still a local tax. The difference is it's taxing sales. So anybody that's ever come through your town, if they stop at the gas station, if they stop at McDonald's, they count. So it's going to be 1 cent, can't be more than 1 cent, and it can only be for a 5-year period, and it must be voted on. So this is something that's a referendum. It must be voted on by the voters, and has to be done once every 5 years. 1 cent sales tax, but it can generate a lot of money. The difference is, and what people don't understand about SPLOST, is it has to be used on capital improvements and special projects written into the referendum. So if they're going to build a new performing arts center, we can build a new performing arts center, even if we're struggling to fund these teachers, or even if we're struggling to buy textbooks. You know, we've got to use that state money for those things, but we can build this performing arts center because it's in the eSPLOST. The people pass that, and we have the money for that. We can't say, well, you know, we really need an extra teacher for the performing arts program. Let's just use the money for that. That's not legal. The money has to be used on capital improvements and the special projects written into the referendum. It says at the bottom, for example, cannot be used to offset direct instructional or indirect costs. You can't do that. All right, so the last category would be federal funds. So we talked about state, it's a big part of the budget. Local, big part of the budget. eSPLOST, a lot of times a big part that can help offset the construction and the strategic planning of things. Buying new buses can be eSPLOST. Technology, all that, it can be really good for eSPLOST. Now you get to your federal funds. Many schools still receive federal funds, and they have to be monitored. These funds can change based on school demographics and government programs. So, you know, you may be a Title I school, you may not be a Title I school. You may have heard that kind of language. That's federal funds. So what are federal funds? Well, you got Title I, which is the regular program. Title II is to improve teacher quality. If we're doing something like a teacher mentor program, we can fund that through Title II money, so it doesn't come out of our local funds. Title IV, student support and academic enrichment. Sometimes that's a college and career jobs or things like that. And Title VI, which would be special education and pre-K. That's going to be a big piece of what we use. CTAE is a big piece of this, food service. And then, of course, new to the last few years, the COVID-19 programs. You got CARES Act, CRISA, and ARP, all now federal funds that everybody probably starting to hear those words more and understand those are things you can fund. So if you want to get an extra teacher in your classroom, maybe we can pay for it through ARP. Maybe we can pay for it through Title VI. Maybe we can pay through Title IV. You know, understanding these things and what the requirements are for them can be very helpful in you trying to maximize your funding, because this is all things that come from federal government and doesn't come out of your local funds. The negative is they come with a lot of strings attached. They come with a lot of ways you have to prove that it's effective. And so I wouldn't just grab at federal funds, but if you know it's something that will be productive and you know it's something you need, but it's hard to get through local or state money, this is the way to do it. So what does this mean for you guys? I mean, I hope I tried to be as vanilla as I could be in explaining this in a way that hopefully you can understand. But what does that mean? Like, look, this is what I try to say. I mean, how does this matter to you? Why do I care? Why am I listening to this guy talk about the budget? Well, there it is. This is in Pickens County, but this is pretty comparable to most districts. Salary and benefits make up that piece of the pie. So if this budget ever changes, if we ever get in a situation where the state doesn't fund us the same way, the state starts taking money away, which if you guys have been teaching a long time, you know this happened years ago. So the money gets taken away and put on the local to pay, you know, there's not really anywhere to cut. There's not much to cut in this 14%, maybe a little bit. We can have a little less paper at the copy machine. But unfortunately, the only place to cut is salary and benefits, which is us. So we need to understand the budget better and understand finance better so we can make sure we maximize our piece of the pie there. So when you got 23 people in your class, that's great. And if you have to have 27, that's okay too. If you're in high school, I mean, every level's got different things, but keep that in mind. Sometimes the class size changing is there because we don't want to have to eliminate someone. We want to earn more so we can earn that position. Those are what it's all about. This is the slide we showed at the beginning. Hopefully by now you can limit some misinformation. You at least have a better idea of how funding works. Salary and benefits are by far the largest. We just talked about that. And understand when you can maximize funding. Is there a federal program? When you're asking for something, you need another teacher in social studies. You need a reading person, an intervention program in elementary school. Is there a federal program I can work with that? Is this something we can earn through the state? When you're asking for these things with your principal, understanding funding is going to be very helpful. And lastly, educate yourself. Make education great so we can get to what really is important, which is student achievement and helping students grow and be better people and graduate and be life prepared. That's what it's all about. But we want to maximize the funding to give them the best possible experience possible. So I hope that was informative. You need to take the quiz, show how much you understand, prove you're a genius, prove you know it all about funding. And I hope this has been somewhat helpful. And please reach out if we can ever help.